Every time you want to build and you have resources to build, it means you have enough money to engage someone to help you to design. And a lot of times when you avoid using an architect, you end up having your fundi as the architect. I have an incident where a consultant saved the client more money than they were being paid by one call they made to a supplier. The future is urban, and we are all moving towards urban centers. In our developed countries, urban areas are growing very fast. Very soon, most of our population will be living in cities, and cities are much smaller and denser. They'll start building a kibanda there, a juala, then the next thing they'll build a mabati, and then they will live there permanently. A lot of construction in our country does not involve professionals. That space that was supposed to be a people's space has been walled in. In my opinion, any building that requires an AC in Nairobi is not a good building. My name is Arabbu. Nowadays, I also like to go with by my son Mjengo. So I'm an architect and I'm a partner at Sitescape Studio. Sitescape Studio has a presence. We are currently, our office is in Mombasa. My partner is based there. I'm based in Nairobi. I also currently serve as the Vice President of the Architectural Association of Kenya. First, I would say that architectural is slightly wider than what architects do. Architectural is the science, the art and science of construction, of building, and also working with the natural environment. So for example, within architecture, you have landscape architect. So there's a profession around that, an emerging profession. There is also interior design. There is also interior architecture. But I would just say that there's a lot of misconception that architects do plans, draw, and that's probably a very small output of what an architect does. Because we sort of consult, we advise on how to appropriate space. So either space for living, space for studying, space for working, space for leisure, and indoors, outdoors. So the whole idea of appropriation of space for use by a human being it's a broader thing than just drawing plans. So there's a misconception around that, but it also can be looked at from the perspective of what clients are looking for or what they don't know they need. So if you need a house, the solution is not a plan. That's all I'm just saying. There's more than a plan. The solution is bigger than a plan. If you look at it from the perspective of space use, as human beings, there's a normal way in which you use space. What do we do? You sleep, you wake up, you eat, you play, you work, you travel, okay? You spend time with friends. All this, and then of course there's the aspects of connection with the nature, which we learned very well during COVID, that it was probably the best medicine. So as an architect, my job is to make sure that the space that this person is using, one, meets the need, and also does not make their life difficult, does not strain their life. I'll give a very basic example. For example, if the chair you're sitting on is making you sick, or the house you're living in, the room you're living in, does not enhance your connection with nature, through daylight, through fresh air and all those kind of things, that house is not making you better. It's actually making you sick, and that's a problem. So the job of an architect, really, in my opinion, is to make sure that if you are doing something, you need to do it in the best optimum way. So if the room you are in doesn't have sufficient light for reading, and you want to read, you can't read. If the kitchen you are working on, the countertop is so high that every time you're working on it, you are straining, it doesn't count as a good architecture. So there's a lot of this work that if you think about the user, and you think about the space, and you connect them, and you make it a joy, then it becomes, easier. For the various works we're doing, I've done quite a bit from the aspects of urban design, which is a much bigger scope in terms of just looking at how buildings connect and spaces, to designing a house, a single house or a room. And in between, I've done a couple of institutions, schools. I've done a lot of hospitality industry. When I was in employment, I did quite a bit of hotels. And every time you do something, you realize that the main client is not the guy who's paying the price, the cost. It's actually the user. So if you're designing a kindergarten, your client is the kids. And if those kids don't enjoy the space, then you failed. It doesn't matter whether you are paid and the guy who paid you was happy with what you did. If you're designing a hospital and the people don't get well because of the space, or the doctors don't perform their services or appropriately, then you may have failed in that, the aspect of the job. So Sitescape, as our practice, we really haven't gone into that level of specializing, but the two of us came from employment where we had some rich experiences in doing different projects. So when we came together, it was more of just trying to combine resources. But we've done quite a bit of hospitality. We've done a bit of hotels, both at the beach and in urban areas. We've done a couple of institutions. We've done one of our interesting projects would be the Adventure Center at Kereja, which is in a forest setup, zip lining. People go there to connect with nature. We've done a couple of our apartments, high-rise apartments, which really it's just about densification, but at the same time working with spaces that are within, a neighborhood that is plots are hard to come by, so you have to go high. An example is, where we had to do a property which is 7 meters wide, and you have to do, several units per level. We've done quite a bit of private residential, and for me personally, as part of the Sitescape group company, is I don't think any project is small. So if I get, for example, a residential house, I just give it my all. One of the things I like to do is understanding the site. I would like to be as responsive as possible to sites. One, in the nature, the kind of ground we're talking about, that's the topography, the views, the kind of views, the accesses, how it relates to the rest of the space. And we've done residential houses across the country in quite a number of counties, and we actually go to the ground. We really don't like to design off desktop site visits. I like to go and look at the ground and then understand it, then try to respond to what the ground wants. I'm also keen on environmental design, so climate responsive design. And we realize that it's actually cheaper in the long run for the client to have a house that is climate responsive, in terms of you don't need to switch on your lights during the day because there's enough daylight, there's enough fresh air. You are connecting with nature. We have a lot of emphasis on how the link between external and internally, that interface for us is very critical. I like to look at it from this perspective. Did we used to build since even pre-colonial times, when we could not be talking about anything to do with economic growth and all that? Human beings are by nature architects. In fact, we've been building for a very long time. And of course, since we left the caves, because even getting a bright cave was a part of architecture. But right now, as a profession, so we have the idea of the profession of architecture. Just the same way we had the profession of medicine, okay? And others, lawyers and all that. I think the most important thing to look at it is that we can afford it. we just don't want to get it because of, one, is ignorance. And in fact, some of the people who can afford architects are the ones who say they can't afford it. It's not even the guys who don't know about architects, don't even think they can. They don't even talk about that. I have designed a house for a relative, and the only thing I asked for her, because I didn't want to do it for free, was I asked her to send me some of her farm produce. And she did send me a bunch of bananas and a couple of things. Because the idea that you need an architect is a thought. Yeah. So if, for example, today I have a camera and I think I don't need a photographer, and maybe that photographer might actually charge me nothing, then that's a problem. So right now, every time you want to build and you have resources to build, it means you have enough money to engage someone to help you to design. And a lot of times when you avoid using an architect, you end up having your fundi as the architect, because the fundi will make the design decisions because you will not know what to make. So the only way to look at it is this. If you want to build, most of the time, the amount of money or the resources you will need for a designer's input is actually within that budget you already have. And you might even find that you'll spend more money avoiding an architect because of what you'd call abortive works, which are essentially just things you build and then you have to demolish because they are a mistake. But if you had the right plan in the first way, you would actually end up saving money. I like to put it also this way, that I have an incident where a consultant saved the client more money than they were being paid by one call they made to a supplier. So it's a misconception that you cannot afford an architect, really, yeah, or any consultant for that matter. Dreamcities is a forum that was convened back in 2007, and the idea of Dreamcities was really very simple. Initially, we had a mind of doing what we call, we create a platform for ideas of what our cities would be, our towns and our urban areas. Because a lot of these things with planning, it's got to be based on vision, and then you aim towards it. So what we were working around was, how do people visualize what they want? Sometimes you don't know what you want until you see it. So we had a thought of doing what we call digital twins of any urban area. So you just go there, and if someone thinks that there's a street light that's required in this street corner, they can be able to put it there. If there's a space for open places, playing areas that kids wanted, or maybe it can be made better, you do it as best as you can. And then the other idea would be to take all the various dream projects that students do in class for their thesis, or professionals do, and they're never built, and then putting them as if they were existing, and then someone will be able to experience them. And then hopefully that would trigger all these issues about better planning and better living in cities. Because anyway, I don't want to repeat this, it's probably a cliche that the future is urban, and we are all moving towards urban centers. In our developed countries, urban areas are growing very fast. Very soon, most of our population will be living in cities, and cities are much smaller and denser. So we really need to start dreaming how they look like. Imagine 50% of Kenyans, that's about 25 million people, actually not 25, or 20 something, over 25, 26, 27, living in cities. And cities occupy much, much smaller land. Then with all those social issues, people living very close together, what happens? Without proper plans on how there'll be a lot of crime. Okay, there'll be a lot of social immorality and all that. And there's always this thing that is painted about a dystopian future where everything just doesn't work and it's everyone for himself. But there's also possible the other way around, where cities are themselves engine of growth, both in terms of social economic development, etc. Climate change is happening, but things to do with flooding and adverse weather is actually enhancing climate change. So if, for example, we say today that people are planning urban areas properly and other places and living in the proper areas, even with the climate change, we can still survive. I mean, even in the Bible, people survived the great deluge, Noah and all that, because they planned it, they did an ark, and those who survived. But right now, when these things happen, the reason we are seeing all this loss of livelihoods, loss of lives and everything, is because we are very ignorant. Okay, we are very ignorant of, one, planning with the sites, planning with the nature, planning with climate, planning with our conditions, and really where we stay. So there is a combination of, so for me, I don't blame climate change. Climate change will happen. And in fact, I think there's even more to climate change than just human activities. Human activities is just contributing to what is going to happen as a change. Yeah. And but now when you come to flooding, for example, why is flooding happening? There was a joke, I don't know whether you saw that joke of some politician in Tanzania saying hakuna mafuriko Tanzania, ni watu wanakaa kwenye maji, kwa njia ya maji. So if people are not living there in the first place, we would not be talking about flooding, we just be talking about high waters. But there's a very major problem of our uncontrolled urban growth. So people are building closer and closer to where they're seeing is, okay, they might not be seeing it's a flood zone because they don't know. Floods don't happen regularly. So if you go to a riparian land, which sometimes you mark with the highest water level, that highest water level might not be achieved a very long time. I think the last time we had a serious flooding was 2020, and that was not as serious as this time. But between that time and this time, you could find that a land near the river or the lowest part of the city is empty. And what happens? Someone comes and builds houses there and people move in, and they are cheap. I'm working on a project where I went to some place, and the first thing I saw was this place looks like it's a flood area, but it was dry. A few months later, the client sends me photos of water. The whole place is waterlogged. So we need to have fast culture. I don't know whether I can call it cultural or society wisdom of how people build, where not to build, how not to build, and how to build. But most importantly, because of the issues of urban development, we need proper urban planning. But not just planning in the sense that you have a planner telling you this and all that, but even knowing culturally. If you go and build 30 meters from, even that 30 meters thing, of course, it's just arbitrary. The one they give us as a code, the riparian setback, it could go higher. But if someone tells you someone lived there 40 years ago, they will tell you this place, it can flood. So no one should be able to build there. But then the question is, what do we do with this space? Even if we demolish these buildings in the riparian reserve, what is the riverine community or living going to look like? Because you can't just leave it open. If you leave it open, someone will come and move in, especially with people low-income earners who are looking for anywhere to live. They will go and build. They'll start building a kibanda there, a juala. Then the next thing they'll build a mabati. Then they will live there permanently. Then 5 years down the line, it will flood. So I think it's a whole hodgepodge of things, but it starts off with first understanding the topography of every city. Nairobi, remember, Kitambo was even a swampy area. Even by the time the railway city was settled, the railway settlement was starting here, most of Nairobi was swampy. The colonialists who were the rich were living in the upper areas of Nairobi, okay, the upper sides of Nairobi. And then they did all these other places, Kule Chini, and then of course the African settlements were to the east, which were the lowest part of the river of Nairobi. And then what happens when, after independence, a lot of people were moving into the city, were moving to the place they could afford, which was the eastern part of the city. And that's where you're seeing all this proliferation and a sprawl without the historical wisdom of how this place has always been. And that's where we are ending up with paying the price for this flooding. AAK, that's the Architectural Association of Kenya, was established in 1967. So initially there were 4 professions that time: architects, planners, quantity surveyors, and engineers. And it has really developed now into 8 different professions, including construction project managers, interior designers, landscape architects, and environmental design consultants. Initially it was it's a business membership, a BMO, a business membership organization. Initially, of course, there was quite a number of mature guys. This industry had fewer people. There were few universities teaching architecture, for example, and engineering. But right now, as we see the schools starting to teach, there's more schools, and then even the population of students has exploded. I mean, when I joined the University of Nairobi in 2000, the class was about, I think, 50 were enrolled, graduating about 30, and only about 3 women. It was a very big gender imbalance. Right now, as we speak, we are talking about maybe 100 per class or more, some even 150, and the ratio is like almost 50-50. So we are seeing a lot of fresh injection of professionals, and faster, because now every year there are more graduates, there are more women. I need to say that because our industry is always seen as a men-dominated space. So all these people are coming into the space. So what do you expect when you go for an election? You will find a lot of young professionals in the space. We actually have a lot of student membership also, because the association has also recruited a lot of student members. And so these are the ones who eventually graduate. By the time they graduate, they progress into corporate membership. And of course, the senior guys are sort of taking a like a leadership, thought leadership role. We have a college of fellows, and we have a lot of seniors who are basically happy to just guide the young professional to lead. Architects study all these things. In fact, the reason why we spend 6 years in school is not just to draw and draw houses. We have to study. First of all, you have to study the philosophy of design. It's the first years, the formative years are mostly to do with understanding design. And I remember one of our lecturers telling us about being de-schooled, because we have been schooled to think that this is what it is, but it's not. So you spend that time, deconstructing what you think you know, and then you have to go and study the architectural language, how to draw and all that. Then you have to study landscaping, you have to study interior architecture, you have to study urban planning, you have to study housing. You have to study all those, because that's part of the training of an architect. And then when you leave school, some people specialize. Okay, there are people who actually specialize they are into nature. I know someone who goes someone is is more interested in landscape architecture. They did a master's in landscape architecture, and they actually like to call themselves a landscape architect. I know someone who did a master's in interior design. I know people who have gotten become to be interior designers by virtue of their experience projects. That's the same way I can do hotels, and I can say today I'm an expert in doing hotels, hospitality projects. There are people who actually go and do institutions. They can tell you they have done so many churches, they have done so many schools. So the aspects of competition is actually misguided, because it also happens that we also think that we are competing. But I like to state that the statistics are very stark, that professionals will control a very small part of the industry. The National Building Inspectorate and the NCA survey that was conducted, and a lot of construction in our country does not involve professionals. Majority, up to 65%, there is no input by professionals. They will just come to you, get drawings, and go and proceed. In fact, most of them don't even get drawings from you. Because what they did, they actually inspected ongoing projects, and they realized that there's only a very small part that we are involved in. Because what most people do is that they'll get a design from you, and they'll go out, they'll just go and draw it, then get through Kanjo, through knowing people, and they get them approved and they start building. Which tells you this, that the competition we are creating amongst ourselves is null and void. Our real competitors are actually non-professionals. They are the developers, self-built. I'll call them so-called quacks, people who don't have the title but they go by that name. They're the ones who are controlling the industry. So the best thing we can do as professionals is actually find our ways, a niche, and find ways of collaboration, because there's no one project that an architect can do by themselves. If the moment an architect does that, even by my own my regulation that guides how I practice the CAP 525 of the Architects and Quantity Surveyors Act, it asks me that every time I get into a project, the first thing I need to do after talking to the client about the project is introduce the need for other professionals, including a quantity surveyor, because I cannot start working without the input of a quantity surveyor. If really, for the client, cost issues are major. If you're looking at structural issues, I need to introduce a structural engineer. I cannot design structural. If the quantum for interior design it requires an interior designer, I'm supposed to introduce an interior designer on the project. The same thing with landscape architecture. So I would say that architects might not be jealous of interior designers. Maybe it's the other way around, okay, but I'm not sure. But I think we all need each other. And for you to deliver a good product, you need some people who can help you. But you know why we're doing this? It's because we are always competing on fees. So when the client does not want to pay proper fees, I see like if I don't get it, these other people are still get paid. But then it costs the project, and then that reflects badly on me as an architect, because if the project doesn't work out, it really doesn't reflect well. I got a similar question from a client a couple of years ago, because she traveled and she kept asking me why there's a lot of ugly buildings in Arabbu. What is the problem? So I alluded to some. I can refer to what I answered you earlier about the issue of professionalism. So everyone thinks they are an architect. They can build, they can design for themselves. They can design for themselves, and build. And so what does that mean? We have a very low threshold of good design, because for us, design is like, it can be considered to be expensive. It can also be considered to be not necessary. So if I don't know what a good design is, do you think I will look for a designer? I'll just think I can do it myself. Just the same way if you think about cuisine and taste buds and someone who has eaten different cuisines from different cultures, they have a better understanding of what good taste is. Yeah. But then when it comes to design and architecture, we have reduced it to basic things about housing. So if it's about a home, there's a difference. A home, in my opinion, is good design. A house, anyone can build a house. A house is a structure, walls, roofs, floor. But a home is a space. So it has a house, but it has a particular feeling to it. The character, the mood, and what it makes you feel like you want to go home, and the place you want to spend with your family. But I think a lot of Kenyans are living, working, and going to school in structures which have no aesthetic value. And an architect's job it is an art and a science. So the science is about the building technology, the mechanism, the reaction to nature, and all that. But the art is the tactile characteristics. And this is where we're saying, for example, how does a building look like? The form, the shape, the relationship with the rest of the street, and the relationship with the sun and the landscape, and how people relate to it. When I walk beside the building, is it just a tall structure next to me, or does it invite me, or it has this human scale to it? You can only achieve that when you get professionals, and the right professionals as such. So if I agree with you, The architecture of Nairobi is ugly. Majority of it. It's not climate responsive. It is not human. It has no human characteristics to it. It has no cultural value. So it has not been informed by culture. But there are a few examples which are coming up, which we are hoping can be able to bring in that, because all this is philosophy. When a guy comes and designs a building, they have to think about what is informing them and what is the need of that, what is around them. It takes time. That's a difficult one. In fact, I think you might be fixing me, because I think what I like, sometimes it's about when you look at it. You can have clever look and you think, I like what I see, but maybe I can change. I mean, it's opinion. It's an opinion. But of course, something like ICC, for example, it's an interesting building in very many ways because of the use of materials, the scale of the building. If you see how the tower relates to the amphitheater and then the rest of the buildings, because what you do, people always see is just the tower, but there's a very big expansion of a footprint of the whole space, plus the statue where it is, the plaza, and the connection. The only problem is right now what has happened, that space which was supposed to be a people's space, it has been walled in. And now it's only used as a parking most of the time when there are events. It was supposed to be a place where people come in and flow in. You have this building, the classical courts on one side, and you have that statue, the water feature. Those are supposed to be experienced by people. There's even a throughway. You can actually walk from one side of the street to the other side. These are the street at the city hallway. Some of the character of the buildings are actually very old. Even the city hall and the old parliament, not the new one, the new extension, the old parliament, this church, Holy Family. Then you go to the parliament building, the old parliament building. I was also mentioning some of the kind of modern, it's a modern design actually, in architectural language we call it modern. The IPS building, I think it's white, it's on Himati Street, but it's one of those climate responsive buildings. It's just a white building with a lot of sun shading elements, so that when you are inside, it's actually cooler. You don't need an AC inside there. In my opinion, any building that requires an AC in Nairobi is not a good building. In fact, a lot of the buildings which have been designed with glass blocks, those glass blocks, in my opinion, they're all bad. So that's my opinion. Let me say this, before I went to do architecture, I did a diploma in computer science. In fact, I thought I was going to end up there, but I got a letter to do architecture. So for me, I first interacted with computers when I was in high school. And yeah, I just thought that these are things which we have to live with. In fact, one of the biggest lessons I learned in technology is about garbage in, garbage out. It's a mantra that was used a couple of years ago, where you're being said the advice is simple. The computer is not the one that is doing everything. It is you using it to enhance your skills, to be more productive, to be more creative. If you look at where we started with computers, when it started off, first of all, we were drafting on the tables. Then we had some very basic CAD, that is computer-aided drafting. Then slowly we became design. There was an issue of design in it. And then we got to building information modeling, which is essentially just inputting a lot of information, and then the computer helps you to model and faster. So it is your thought, but fast-tracked. Now, when we start talking about AI, it is really about, first of all, AI depends on a lot of data. Okay, so there's machine learning, where you input a lot of information, and then the computer is able to do very fast, much faster calculations than you could, to do what you could have done in a much shorter period of time. My opinion is that certain professional input and human interactions are required. The only problem comes in when especially architects think that they can avoid using computers and still be competitive, because this is about competition. Today, someone can generate renders within a day. Yeah. A couple of years ago, people had to draw it by hand. Even if you are the best artist in the world, how long will it take you to develop that render? And the turnaround time, yeah? And then there's now the complexity of the construction sector. Because right now people are even going to a point where the design itself, there's no human being that can draw a detail. Yeah, if you look at, for example, Zahadid's project, a lot of the detailing cannot be done by hand. You basically have to use the computer to push that limit to a point whereby you can now do simulations of how that building will react in a certain climatic condition. So for me, artificial intelligence, it will threaten not the profession, but some people in the profession, and those people who are trying to think that they don't need it. Just to say finally that I think AI will work better if we all embrace it and improve it. Because if every one of us pushes it to a limit where you query things, you put prompts that it hadn't thought about. So the people who are developing it will have to improve the various software. And then also, what is the need? I just saw the other day that ChatGPT 4.0 has just been launched, and it does human interaction. Like I can literally chat with it, and you can also use the camera to be able to make decisions by just looking at using the camera. So if I'm sketching, I can just point at it and it can guide me. I think that is we just have to adopt it. And then for me, I always like the back and forth. I still think a pencil is great for making notes, making quick sketches and discussing. But then immediately I go back to the computer, and then the back and forth for me is great, where you go back to the pencil, go to the computer. I scan some of the things I sketch, I scan it onto the computer, and then the computer helps me to generate the 3D. I'm looking forward to AI which can automatically render for me. I'm tired, I don't want to render, so I can draw it, set the view, and then tell AI to render. That I would love it to do, but I don't want it to design for me to the maximum where I am irrelevant. The relevance is that the human touch will give it more premium. And I think moving forward, we will see a situation whereby crafted things which are bespoke, because a lot of the computer generated things are generic. I can go to the supermarket and I can go to the street and buy a plant. But there will be space for people who are looking for handcrafted, custom-made, bespoke stuff. Whether it's fashion, whether it is cars, whether it is houses, I think there are people who will still be willing to pay, and it will be a premium for such kind of services.